Ashwood Vale Plantation lay in the Piedmont country of Virginia, where the land rose and fell in slow, patient folds. The soil was dark and loamy, suited to wheat and corn, and it had been worked steadily for generations. Fences marked the fields in long, straight lines. Lanes of packed earth ran between barns, quarters, and the big house. Nothing about the place suggested sudden change. It was a property built to endure and to grind down those who labored upon it. The big house stood on a slight rise, white columns facing east to catch the morning light. Its paint was kept fresh, its windows cleaned regularly, its roof repaired as needed. From its front steps a man could see nearly the entire operation. The field stretched outward in careful order. Beyond them stood the stables, low and long, built of weathered wood and stone, their doors opening onto paddocks worn bare by hooves. Past the stables, set farther back and partly screened by trees, were the quarters where the enslaved lived. The quarters were arranged in a rough line. Each cabin was built of logs chinked with mud, roofs sagging slightly with age. Smoke rose from the chimneys most mornings and evenings. Inside, the floors were dirt. The walls let in wind in winter and insects in summer. There was little privacy. Voices carried easily. Grief carried even more easily, though it was rarely spoken aloud. Life at Ashwood Vale followed a strict rhythm. The bell rang before dawn. Enslaved people rose from their pallets, pulled on worn clothing, and stepped outside into the half-light. In the fields, work began as soon as there was enough light to see the rows. In the house, servants lit fires and prepared breakfast. In the stables, horses were fed, watered, and groomed. Each task repeated itself day after day, season after season, with little variation. Josiah rose earlier than most. He slept in a small room attached to the main stable, a space no larger than a storage shed but dry and close to his work. The smell of hay and leather filled the air. Mice moved in the walls. In winter, cold crept in through the boards. In summer, heat settled and did not leave. He slept on a narrow pallet and kept his few belongings neatly arranged. Before dawn, he would rise, wash his face at the pump, and step into the stable. The horses knew him by sound. They lifted their heads when his footsteps approached. Some nickered softly. Others watched him in silence. He spoke to them in low tones, not words meant to be understood, but sounds meant to calm. He moved among them with practiced ease, checking feed, running his hands along legs and backs, noting small changes that others would miss. A shift in weight, a hesitation in movement, a dullness in the eye. Horses were the pride of Ashwood Vale. They were bred carefully, trained slowly, and sold at high prices. Visitors came from other counties and other states to see them. They spoke of bloodlines and speed and strength. They praised the Whitfield operation. They did not speak of Josiah, though he stood nearby, holding reins, listening, remembering. Josiah had been at Ashwood Vale since childhood. He had grown into his work the way a tree grows into the space allowed it. He was tall, lean, his body shaped by years of riding and lifting and walking on uneven ground. His hands were scarred and calloused, but steady. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. When he did, his words were measured. He had learned early that speech could bring trouble. His mother, Ruth, had taught him other lessons. She had spoken of a place across the ocean, a place she remembered dimly, where horses were honored and riders trained from youth. She had spoken of dignity as something carried inside, something that could not be taken unless surrendered. She had died when Josiah was still a child, after a punishment that no one questioned and no one answered for. Her death had not changed the routine of the plantation. The bell had rung the next morning as usual. After her death, Josiah had been sold and brought to Ashwood Vale. He had learned quickly that fear of horses was not expected of him. His lack of fear marked him as useful. He was given tasks others were not. He learned the work thoroughly, not because he was rewarded for excellence, but because failure carried consequences. Over the years, his skill made him valuable, valuable enough to protect, valuable enough to isolate. He was not sent to the fields. He was not rented out. He was not beaten except when authority felt challenged. His value was measured in coin and reputation, not in humanity. Grace lived nearby in a cabin set close to the stable. She had been brought to Ashwood Vale years earlier, purchased with the intention of marrying her to Josiah. The arrangement suited the master. A contented man worked better. Grace had accepted her situation with a quiet strength that did not draw attention. She worked in the house and the kitchen, sewing, cooking, cleaning. Her hands were quick. Her mind was sharper than she let on. In the evenings, when work allowed, Josiah and Grace sat together outside their cabin. They spoke softly. Sometimes they spoke of nothing at all. Grace tended a small patch of ground behind the cabin where she grew herbs. She said little about them. She used them when needed. Other women came to her quietly for help with pains or sickness. Grace never asked questions. She never spoke of what she knew. Their marriage was recognized only in the most informal sense. No record existed. No protection followed. Still, they treated it with seriousness. They shared what little they had. They grieved losses together. They spoke of a future carefully, as one might speak of something fragile. Grace had lost children before. Each loss had been marked privately. There was no time given for mourning. Work resumed quickly. This time in the spring of that year, the pregnancy had lasted. By early summer, her condition was visible. Josiah watched her closely, not out of fear but habit. He carried her water when he could. He adjusted his pace to match hers. He listened when she spoke. The other enslaved people noticed. They noticed the way Josiah looked at Grace. They noticed the care. It was not unusual, but it was rare enough to be remarked upon in silence. No one commented openly. Silence was safer. The overseer, Thaddeus Grimm, arrived before the planting season. His presence changed the atmosphere of the place. He rode through the fields daily, watching, correcting, punishing. He believed order was maintained through pain. His voice carried. His whip carried further. The bell still rang. The routine continued, but fear sharpened. Grimm did not like exceptions. He did not like men who moved freely. He did not like skill that he could not command. Josiah represented all three. Grimm watched him closely. He waited. Cornelius Whitfield watched as well, though in a different manner. He had inherited the plantation recently. He had inherited authority and debt and expectation. He had returned from schooling with habits that did not suit the quiet rhythms of the countryside. He drank. He entertained. He asserted himself where his father had not. Cornelius rode the property often. He liked to be seen. He carried weapons openly. He spoke loudly. He interfered with work he did not understand. When he visited the stables, Josiah stood ready, hat in hand, eyes lowered unless instructed otherwise. He answered questions directly. He did not volunteer opinions unless asked. Grace avoided Cornelius when possible. Other women did as well. They adjusted their routes, their timing. They spoke in glances and small movements. Nothing was said outright. Everyone understood. Days passed in this manner. Work filled the hours. Silence filled the spaces between. In the mornings, mist rose from the fields. In the evenings, insects sang. The horses shifted in their stalls. The quarters settled into uneasy rest. Josiah took note of everything. He noted who rode which horse. He noted which gates were loose, which boards warped. He noted the habits of men and animals alike. He did not plan. He did not imagine outcomes. He observed. Observation had kept him alive. Grace continued her work. She sang softly when alone. She rested when she could. She spoke of names in the evenings. Josiah listened. He did not interrupt. He did not correct. He allowed himself cautiously to imagine a child walking beside him in the paddocks, a small hand reaching for a horse's nose. The plantation did not acknowledge these thoughts. The bell rang. The seasons turned. Authority remained unchallenged. The imbalance of power was visible in every interaction. Orders were given. Obedience was expected. Punishment followed deviation. Nothing in those early months suggested what would come. There were no omens, no warnings, only the steady pressure of a system designed to endure and the quiet lives lived within it, marked by routine, restraint, and the careful management of hope. This was daily life at Ashwood Vale. The first change was not sudden. It did not announce itself with raised voices or drawn weapons. It came instead as a tightening, almost imperceptible at first, like a rope pulled 1 inch at a time. Those who lived at Ashwood Vale felt it before they could name it. The air carried a different weight. People paused more often before speaking. Eyes dropped sooner. Cornelius Whitfield had begun to involve himself more directly in the daily operations of the plantation, where his father had issued instructions through overseers and trusted men to carry them out. Cornelius preferred to witness obedience for himself. He appeared without warning in the fields, in the stables, at the quarters. He asked questions that were not meant to be answered honestly. He corrected work he did not understand. When things went wrong, he blamed those closest at hand. Josiah noticed the change most clearly in the stables. Cornelius began visiting more frequently and staying longer. He asked about breeding decisions already made. He questioned feed mixtures Josiah had used for years. He ordered changes, then returned days later to demand explanations when the results were poor. Josiah listened. He nodded. He adjusted where adjustment was possible. Where it was not, he waited. The horses responded to Cornelius's presence. They sensed impatience. They sensed uncertainty. Josiah spent extra hours calming them afterward, undoing the tension introduced by rough hands and loud voices. He said nothing of this. Speaking would not help. Thaddeus Grimm took his cues from the master. His discipline grew harsher. He extended work hours slightly, then again. He reduced rest periods. He punished small infractions publicly. The point was not correction but demonstration. He wanted obedience to be visible. In the quarters, conversations shortened. People gathered less often. Prayer meetings moved deeper into the woods and met less frequently. Parents warned children more sharply. Women avoided walking alone after dusk whenever possible, though work did not always allow choice. Grace felt the change in her work in the house. Cornelius lingered longer in the kitchen doorway. His gaze followed movement. Orders were delivered close, his breath heavy with drink. Grace kept her head down. She spoke only when addressed. She adjusted her routes through the house to minimize passing through isolated spaces. Other women did the same. No one discussed it openly. The danger was understood without words. One afternoon, a house servant named Eliza was accused of breaking a plate. The accusation was minor. The response was not. Grimm ordered her whipped in the yard where others could see. Eliza did not cry out. She fainted after the 5th stroke. Grimm continued until told to stop. Cornelius watched from the porch, expression unreadable. That evening no one spoke of it, but the sound of the whip lingered. Children lay awake longer. Men stared into the dark. Women sat together silently until sleep overtook them. Josiah worked late that night. A mare due to foal showed signs of distress. He stayed with her, murmuring softly, his hand steady. When the foal was born alive and strong, he allowed himself a brief exhale. Life continued, indifferent to injustice. The next incident involved the fields. Grimm accused a group of men of working too slowly. He singled out one, a man named Isaac who had injured his leg weeks earlier. Isaac protested quietly, pointing to his limp. Grimm struck him for speaking. When Isaac fell, Grimm ordered him to stand. When he could not, Grimm left him in the row until sundown. Isaac did not return to work the next day. He was moved to lighter tasks, then removed altogether. No explanation was given. His wife took on extra labor. His children were sent to work earlier than planned. The system adjusted without pause. Josiah saw Isaac occasionally near the quarters, moving with difficulty. Their eyes met once. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. The tension reached the stables one humid afternoon in midsummer. Josiah was working with a young colt, patient and methodical. The animal was nervous but improving. Cornelius arrived with visitors, men whose laughter carried too far. They drank from flasks and commented freely. Cornelius ordered a demonstration. Josiah explained carefully that the colt was not ready. The explanation was correct. It was also unwelcome. Cornelius insisted. The visitors watched with interest. Josiah complied. The colt reared, startled by noise and unfamiliar faces. Josiah brought him down safely, but the moment had already been lost. Cornelius interpreted the hesitation as defiance. The punishment was not severe by plantation standards. 5 strokes, measured, controlled. The purpose was humiliation. Josiah accepted it without sound. He did not move. He did not look at Cornelius. When it was over, Cornelius laughed and turned away. The visitors followed, their interest satisfied. The stables returned to their usual sounds. Horses shifted. Flies buzzed. Josiah resumed work, his back burning, his expression unchanged. Word spread quickly through the quarters. Grace heard it from another woman while preparing supper. She did not react outwardly. Her hands continued their work. Inside, something tightened. That evening she waited for Josiah near the cabin. When he arrived, she said nothing at first. She examined his back carefully, cleaning the wounds with water and herbs. Her hands trembled slightly. Josiah noticed but did not comment. "It will heal," he said quietly. She nodded, "I know." They sat together as darkness settled. Neither spoke of Cornelius. Neither needed to. The next injustice came swiftly, before the previous one had faded. It was smaller in appearance but deeper in consequence. Grace was sent to the smokehouse near dusk to retrieve meat for supper. The path was familiar. She walked it often. The light was low but sufficient. She was thinking of Josiah, of the baby, of nothing in particular. Cornelius and 3 other men followed her. What occurred inside the smokehouse was not witnessed by those who would later speak of it in records. It was known only through fragments, through the shaking voice of a child, through the blood left on the floor, through the absence that followed. An enslaved boy hiding nearby heard her cry out. He heard laughter. He heard pleas. He did not understand all of it, but he understood enough. He remained frozen until the men left. When Josiah was summoned, he ran. He had never run like that before. The distance felt endless. When he reached the smokehouse, Grace lay on the floor, blood pooling beneath her. She was alive, barely. Her eyes struggled to focus. Josiah knelt beside her. He spoke to her. He told her he was there. He told her help would come. He believed it as he said it. An older woman came with herbs and cloth. She worked quickly, efficiently, with the knowledge of someone who had seen this before. She did not speak unnecessarily. Grace's body began to fail. The pregnancy ended violently. There was too much blood. No doctor was called. None would have come. Grace died late that night. Her last words were quiet. Josiah listened. He promised what she asked. He did not yet know what the promise would require. Grim arrived with a lantern. He took in the scene without surprise. He asked no questions. He issued instructions. Work would resume. The body would be buried the next day. Josiah would return to duty after a short period. The injustice was complete in its efficiency. There would be no investigation, no punishment, no acknowledgement beyond what was necessary to maintain order. Grace was buried without ceremony. The enslaved gathered as they were able. They sang softly. They spoke prayers that asked for rest rather than justice. Josiah stood apart, silent. From that day forward, something shifted. It was not visible immediately. Josiah returned to the stables. He worked as before. He spoke as before. He obeyed as before. But those who watched closely noticed a difference. His silence deepened. His gaze lingered longer. He listened more than he spoke. He began to observe not just horses, but men. Fear spread quietly through Ashwood Vale. Not fear of punishment, which was familiar, but fear of unpredictability. If such a thing could happen to Grace, who was careful, who was known, who was connected to someone valuable, then no one was safe. Women avoided the smokehouse. Children were kept closer. Men clenched their jaws and said nothing. Authority remained unchallenged. The system continued to function. But beneath the routine, something had been exposed. The injustice was no longer abstract. It had a name. It had a body in the ground. And it did not pass unnoticed. After Grace's burial, Ashwood Vale did not slow. If anything, the pace increased. The bell rang earlier. Work ended later. The fields demanded tending regardless of loss, and the stables required constant attention. Authority moved forward as if nothing essential had occurred, and in doing so made clear that nothing essential in its view ever could. Josiah returned to his duties the morning after the burial. He washed his face at the pump until the water ran cold against his skin. He did not look toward the cabin he had shared with Grace. He did not linger. He went directly to the stables and began his work. Those who passed him noticed that he did not speak at all that day unless spoken to, and even then only in the briefest replies. His movements were steady. His hands did not shake. He did not make mistakes. The horses responded to him as they always had, calming at his approach, shifting their weight when he touched them, following small cues without resistance. Cornelius Whitfield watched him closely. The master's fear did not take the shape of remorse. It took the shape of irritation. Grace's death had occurred without his permission, without his intention to be inconvenienced by consequence. The knowledge that something final had happened on his property, something that could not be undone or ignored entirely, unsettled him. He drank more heavily in the evenings. He spoke sharply to servants for small delays. He began carrying his pistol more openly, even within the house. He did not articulate his unease, but it manifested in restlessness. He paced. He summoned Grimm more often. He demanded reports. Grimm, in turn, tightened his grip on the enslaved population. He shortened the distance between command and punishment. He stopped tolerating explanation. He required immediate compliance, regardless of circumstance. In the fields, men were struck for pausing to straighten their backs. Women were struck for slowing under heavy loads. Children were struck for speaking out of turn. Grimm rode among them daily, his presence a reminder that pain was never far. The driver, Marcus, enforced Grimm's rules with particular zeal. He reported minor infractions. He repeated orders loudly, sometimes adding emphasis with his own hands. He watched Josiah from a distance, his expression guarded. Marcus had noticed the change in Josiah as well. He had known Josiah for years, though never closely. He had resented the horseman's privileges. Now he studied him with new interest, uncertain whether what he saw was grief, withdrawal, or something else. The quarters reflected the growing pressure. Conversation ceased when footsteps approached. People ate quickly and retired early. The small comforts that had sustained them grew harder to access. Songs were sung more quietly. Laughter was rare. At night the patrols increased. Grimm organized regular rides along the perimeter. Lanterns moved through the darkness. Dogs were kept restless. The message was clear. Movement would be noticed. Gathering would be punished. Josiah observed all of this without comment. He did not change his routines. He rose early. He worked late. He kept his head down. To those watching from above, he appeared broken but compliant. The loss of his wife had rendered him quieter, more inward. This interpretation suited authority and was accepted without challenge. Inside, however, Josiah's attention had narrowed. The world reduced itself to detail. He noted who drank heavily and when. He noted which men rode which horses and how they handled them. He noted which animals startled easily, which grew aggressive under pressure, which responded to sound more than touch. He did not rush these observations. He did not assign them meaning immediately. He allowed them to accumulate. The horses were sensitive to the changes on the plantation. They sensed tension in the hands that fed them and the voices that approached their stalls. Some grew restless. Others withdrew. Josiah adjusted their care accordingly, spending more time with those most affected, reinforcing trust where it wavered. Cornelius interfered more often. He demanded demonstrations. He ordered changes to feed. He questioned Josiah's judgment openly in front of visitors. Each interference disrupted weeks of careful work. Each disruption increased the animal's agitation. Josiah accepted the criticism. He corrected nothing verbally. He made adjustments privately after Cornelius left. He did not contradict. He did not explain. One evening, Cornelius summoned Josiah to the porch. The master sat with a glass in his hand, staring out at the darkening fields. "You still thinking about that woman?" Cornelius asked abruptly. Josiah stood with his hat in his hands. "Yes, sir." Cornelius snorted. "Best you put it behind you. That sort of thing happens. Can't let it interfere with work." "Yes, sir." Cornelius studied him for a long moment. "You understand your value here, don't you?" "Yes, sir." "Good," Cornelius said. "Wouldn't want to lose a good horseman over foolish sentiment." Josiah said nothing. Cornelius dismissed him with a wave of the hand. As Josiah walked away, he noted the slight tremor in Cornelius's voice. He filed it away without comment. In the days that followed, small rules appeared where none had existed before. Josiah was required to report his movements more frequently, despite the demands of his work. Grim insisted on knowing where he would be and when. The freedom that had once accompanied his role narrowed. Josiah complied. He reported as asked. He adjusted his routes to match expectations. He made his movements predictable. This predictability reassured those watching him. It also allowed him to see how closely he was being observed, and by whom. Marcus approached him one evening near the stables. He spoke casually, as if nothing unusual lay beneath the exchange. "Grim's been watching you," Marcus said. "Master too." Josiah nodded. "I know." Marcus hesitated. "You all right?" Josiah considered the question. "I work," he said. "That's what I do." Marcus studied him, then shrugged. "Just saying, people talking." Josiah did not ask who. Marcus walked away. The pressure intensified as summer deepened. Heat pressed down on the fields and the quarters alike. Tempers shortened. Mistakes multiplied. Grim's punishments grew more severe. Cornelius's drinking worsened. Visitors continued to arrive at Ashwood Vale, drawn by the reputation of the horses and the promise of profit. They came on horseback, stayed for meals, laughed loudly, and spoke of markets and bloodlines. Josiah attended to them professionally, answering questions, preparing animals, offering assessments when asked. He recognized some of them. The men who had been with Cornelius that evening returned at intervals. Their presence did not pass unnoticed by Josiah. He observed them from a distance, noting their habits, their carelessness, their assumptions. They spoke freely around him, believing him incapable of understanding more than surface matters. They drank, they joked, they reminisced. Josiah listened. At night, alone in the cabin that still held traces of Grace's presence, he sat in silence. He did not pray aloud. He did not weep. He allowed memories to surface and pass without resistance. He remembered his mother's stories. He remembered Grace's voice. He remembered the way authority had moved through his life without interruption. The system around him continued to close in. Options narrowed. The space to endure without cost diminished. Every rule, every watchful eye, every tightened restriction made one thing clear. Survival alone would not restore what had been taken. Compliance would not alter the balance of power. Silence would not bring relief. Josiah did not articulate this conclusion to anyone. He did not speak it aloud even to himself. It existed as a quiet understanding, solid and unyielding. As summer began to turn toward its end, the plantation stood taut with tension. Authority pressed down harder. Fear settled deeper. Those at the bottom adjusted as they always had, bending without breaking where possible. But some pressures do not dissipate. They accumulate, they seek release. At Ashwood Vale the conditions were set. The routines continued. The injustice remained unaddressed. The space for retreat had closed. And though nothing outwardly marked the moment, a line had begun to form, drawn not in words or gestures, but in the quiet resolve of a man who had learned every rule of the world that bound him and was no longer willing to live entirely within them. The pressure did not yet break, but it did not ease. The day Thaddeus Grimm died began like many others. The bell rang before dawn. The air was already heavy, holding the promise of heat. In the quarters, people rose quietly and moved toward their assigned places. No one spoke more than necessary. Routine had become a form of protection. Grimm was awake early as usual. He ate standing, took his whip from its hook and saddled his mare without assistance. Fury was a difficult animal, ill-tempered and sensitive to rough handling. Grimm liked her for that reason. He believed the danger sharpened him. He believed fear was a useful thing. Josiah saw Grimm ride out across the fields shortly after sunrise. He noted the direction. He noted the pace. He returned to his work without visible reaction. For weeks, Josiah had been observing the overseer's habits. Grimm rode the same routes at the same hours. He favored the cornfields in the afternoon when the heat was strongest and tempers shortest. He remained in the saddle for long stretches, pressing both horse and people beyond comfort. That morning before the bell, Josiah had visited Fury's stall. He moved carefully, methodically. He adjusted the tack in ways that would not be noticed at first. Nothing he did was obvious. Nothing was done in haste. Each action fit within the ordinary rhythms of his work. He left the stable as he always did. He did not look back. By mid-afternoon, the heat had settled heavily over the plantation. The fields shimmered. Sweat darkened clothing. Grimm rode among the rows, shouting orders, striking when he felt it necessary. Fury's ears were flat. Her movements grew sharp and uneven. Josiah was in the south stable, working with a young foal when he heard the sound. It was not a shout or a scream, but a sudden change in the quality of noise carried on the air. Horses react to such changes. People do as well. Word reached the stables quickly. Grimm had fallen, Fury had panicked, men were running. Josiah did not run. He finished securing the foal, then walked toward the fields at a measured pace. When he arrived, Grimm lay on the ground, his body twisted unnaturally. Fury stood a short distance away, trembling, her sides heaving. Several enslaved men stood nearby, unsure what to do. They had seen the fall. They had seen the horse strike. They had done nothing to intervene. There had been no time. Josiah knelt beside Grimm. He did not touch him immediately. He assessed what was already clear. Grimm's injuries were severe. His chest had been crushed. His face bore marks no human hand could have made. Cornelius arrived shortly thereafter, summoned from the house. He dismounted heavily, pushing past those gathered. He stared down at the body, his mouth slightly open. "What happened?" he demanded. Josiah spoke calmly. "The mare spooked, sir. Something under the saddle, maybe. She reared, he fell. She came down on him." Cornelius looked at Fury, then back at Grimm. He swore softly. He did not question further. The explanation fit what he understood of horses. Accidents happened, especially with animals. Grimm was pronounced dead where he lay. His body was carried away. Fury was led back to the stable, still shaking. Josiah took charge of the mare's care without being asked. He removed the saddle, examined her back, soothed her with quiet sounds. He made recommendations that were accepted without question. Rest, isolation, time. That evening, the plantation was subdued. Grimm's death disrupted the usual order. Overseers were replaceable, but not easily. His absence created a gap that authority did not immediately know how to fill. Cornelius drank heavily that night. He spoke of bad luck. He cursed the horse. He cursed the heat. He did not speak of responsibility. In the quarters, people gathered in low voices. Grimm had been feared and hated, but his death did not bring relief. It brought uncertainty. No one celebrated. No one mourned openly. The system that had produced Grimm remained intact. Josiah returned to his cabin alone. He washed his hands carefully. He ate little. He sat in the dark and listened to the night sounds. The line had been crossed. It was not marked by a declaration or a visible change in his demeanor. It was marked by an internal certainty. What had happened could not be undone. It would not be acknowledged as anything but accident. No justice would be spoken of. No truth would be recorded. Yet something had shifted. A man who wielded unchecked power was gone. The method had been quiet. The explanation had been accepted. The world had not ended. Josiah understood then that the boundaries he had believed absolute were not. They were enforced buyouts of habit and belief, sustained by assumption. When those assumptions were used against themselves, the structure bent. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel relief. He felt clarity. In the days that followed, Cornelius hired a temporary overseer. Patrols increased. Rules tightened again. Grimm's death did not soften authority. It hardened it. Cornelius began to watch Josiah more closely. He asked more questions. He appeared in the stables unannounced. He demanded reports. Josiah provided them. No suspicion was voiced openly. There was no evidence to point anywhere but misfortune. Horses were dangerous. Grimm had known that. Everyone accepted it. Josiah accepted it as well outwardly. He worked, he complied, he spoke when spoken to. Inside, the implications settled. If one death could be absorbed so easily, so completely into the narrative of accident, then others could as well. The plantation's reliance on horses, on routine, on trust in appearances, created openings that authority did not see. Josiah did not yet act on this understanding. He allowed it to rest. He continued to observe. He continued to wait. The crossing of the line did not bring resolution. It brought direction. From that day forward, endurance was no longer the goal. Survival remained necessary, but it was no longer sufficient. The system had shown its limits. Josiah had seen them, and what is seen cannot be unseen. After the death of Thaddeus Grimm, Ashwood Vale settled into a strained imitation of normalcy. The bell rang as before. Work resumed. Orders were issued and obeyed. Yet the absence of the overseer left a hollow space that authority filled clumsily, with suspicion rather than certainty. Cornelius Whitfield appointed a temporary man to supervise the fields, a lesser figure without Grimm's history or confidence. This man relied heavily on Marcus, the driver, who relayed instructions and reported compliance. Marcus's position grew more visible. He spoke louder. He lingered near the big house longer. He accepted the small privileges offered and wore them carefully, as if they might be taken back at any moment. Josiah observed these changes without comment. He did not involve himself in field matters. He remained within the boundaries of the stables, where his authority was practical rather than declared. Horses required care regardless of who held the whip. The stables became his refuge and his ledger. There he noted things with greater deliberation than before. He kept no written record. What he recorded was held in memory, reinforced by repetition. He cataloged which horses reacted to sound and which to pressure. He noted how long agitation lasted and what calmed it. He observed how visitors handled animals, how careless they were with reins and girths, how they trusted the appearance of order. Quiet resistance did not announce itself as defiance. It took the form of attention. Josiah adjusted small things in his routines that appeared innocuous. He spent more time with certain animals and less with others. He allowed particular habits to persist where others might have corrected them. He reinforced behaviors that could later be misinterpreted as temperament rather than training. He did not rush. He had learned the cost of haste. The plantation's rhythms were slow and repetitive, and he matched them. He allowed weeks to pass without incident. Authority relaxed slightly. Fear dulled at the edges. During this time, visitors returned to Ashwood Vale. The horses remained valuable. Cornelius needed income. Men arrived to inspect, to bargain, to drink. They spoke openly around Josiah, confident that he was absorbed entirely in his work. He listened. He heard names repeated. He heard jokes that echoed those spoken on the night Grace died. He heard men refer to that evening obliquely, as if it were a shared understanding not worth revisiting. Josiah did not respond. He continued to adjust saddles and lead horses. His face remained neutral. His voice remained calm. One afternoon, a man named Bogart Hampton arrived to inspect a breeding mare. He stayed longer than planned. He drank with Cornelius. He asked to ride the trails. Josiah prepared the horse as requested. He did so thoroughly, professionally. Nothing appeared amiss. Hampton rode out and did not return. When the horse came back alone, Josiah raised the alarm. A search was organized. Hampton was found beneath a low branch, his neck broken, his body already cooling. The explanation was accepted quickly. Riding accidents were common enough to require little imagination. Josiah expressed regret. Cornelius waved it aside, irritated more by inconvenience than loss. In the days that followed, whispers began to circulate quietly among the enslaved. They did not take the form of celebration. They took the form of cautious acknowledgement. Something was happening, though no one said what. Josiah continued his work. He did not change his demeanor. He did not seek attention. He allowed others to draw their own conclusions if they dared. Quiet resistance requires restraint. It requires patience. It requires the ability to hold knowledge without revealing it. Marcus approached Josiah more frequently after Hampton's death. He spoke of loyalty and order. He hinted at rumors. He asked questions disguised as concern. Josiah answered minimally. He did not contradict. He did not accuse. He allowed Marcus to believe he was gaining information when in truth he was offering none. At night alone, Josiah allowed himself to remember Grace's words. Do not forget. He did not interpret them as a call to violence or mercy. He interpreted them as instruction to bear witness, to retain truth in a place built on denial. He bore witness silently. Each small act, each adjustment, each withheld correction accumulated. The plantation continued to function, unaware of the forces moving within it. Authority remained confident in its control. The enslaved remained outwardly compliant. But beneath the surface, patterns were shifting. Trust in routine began to erode. Accidents accumulated. Explanations sufficed, but unease grew. Josiah did not speak of justice. He did not name his actions. He did not frame them as resistance. He acted within the narrow space allowed him, using the tools he had been given and the knowledge he had earned through decades of labor. This was not rebellion as it was imagined in stories. There were no speeches, no banners, no sudden uprising. There was only careful attention, memory held intact, and the refusal to let events pass without consequence. Quiet resistance does not seek recognition, it seeks effect. And at Ashwood Vale, the effects were beginning to register. By early autumn, the pattern at Ashwood Vale could no longer be dismissed entirely as misfortune, though no one with authority was willing to name it otherwise. 2 white men dead on the property within a season, both attributed to accidents involving horses, unsettled those who depended on the plantation's reputation and order. Unease spread, but it did not take the form of inquiry. It took the form of denial hardened into policy. Cornelius Whitfield responded to uncertainty as he did to most challenges. He tightened control. He spoke more loudly. He drank more deeply. He dismissed questions before they could be fully asked. When neighbors hinted that Ashwood Vale seemed cursed, Cornelius laughed too sharply and reminded them of the dangers inherent in horses and land. He spoke of bad luck, of weather, of human error. He did not speak of patterns. He did not speak of cause. The county sheriff came once formally after Hampton's death. He walked the grounds, spoke with Cornelius, glanced at the stables. He did not question Josiah directly. There was no precedent for such a thing. Enslaved men were not considered reliable witnesses unless they confirmed what authority already believed. The sheriff's report was brief: accidental death, no foul play suspected. Cornelius accepted the report eagerly. He needed it to be true. His standing in the county depended on the appearance of order. Investors and buyers required reassurance. Insurance rates depended on explanations that did not implicate negligence or deeper instability. Within the plantation, Cornelius issued new rules. Enslaved people were forbidden from moving between work areas without explicit permission. Evening movement was restricted further. Patrols were doubled. Lanterns burned later into the night. None of these measures addressed the underlying issue. They addressed only Cornelius's fear. The new overseer proved ineffective. He lacked Grimm's brutality and Grimm's authority. He relied heavily on Marcus, who in turn grew increasingly isolated from the rest of the enslaved community. Marcus enforced rules with enthusiasm, but his position made him visible in a way that drew resentment. Josiah watched Marcus carefully. He noted the man's need for recognition, his eagerness to be seen as indispensable. He noted how Marcus reported minor matters eagerly and more serious ones selectively. He noted how Marcus assumed that proximity to power equaled protection. Josiah did not warn him. Another death followed before the end of harvest. Pike Stevens, an overseer from a neighboring plantation and a frequent visitor to Ashwood Vale, was killed in the south stable while inspecting a stallion. The animal panicked. The stall door gave way. Stevens was struck repeatedly before anyone could intervene. The scene was chaotic. Men shouted, horses reared, blood stained the packed earth floor. Josiah calmed the animal eventually, as he always did. He explained what had happened in precise, professional terms. He emphasized the unpredictability of stallions. He expressed regret. Cornelius accepted the explanation publicly. Privately, something shifted. 3 men, all connected, all dead, all explained. Cornelius began to drink alone rather than with company. He dismissed servants abruptly. He started sleeping with his pistol under his pillow. He locked doors that had never been locked before. Still, he refused to consider the possibility that the danger came from within his assumptions. To do so would require acknowledging that an enslaved man could think, plan, and act beyond the limits imposed upon him. Such acknowledgement was unthinkable. Instead, Cornelius blamed circumstance. He blamed animals. He blamed fate. He blamed the inherent risks of plantation life. He spoke of God's will when pressed. Institutional denial thrives on hierarchy. Those at the top decide what questions may be asked. Those below learn which answers are safe. In the quarters, enslaved people spoke even less than before. The deaths of white men did not bring relief. They brought scrutiny. Patrols watched more closely. Punishments became less predictable. Fear spread unevenly, touching even those far removed from the stables. Josiah remained unchanged outwardly. He continued to work. He continued to comply. His presence reassured Cornelius in a way Cornelius did not examine. Josiah represented continuity. He represented expertise. He represented the idea that order still existed. When Cornelius looked at Josiah, he saw a useful man weighed down by grief, not a threat. This interpretation allowed Cornelius to sleep, if only briefly. The denial extended beyond Ashwood Vale. Other planters accepted the explanations offered because they needed to. To question Cornelius's narrative was to invite questions about their own households, their own dependencies, their own assumptions of safety. Better to believe in accident than to confront the implications of intelligence where intelligence was denied. As autumn deepened, the air cooled. Leaves turned and fell. The fields emptied. Work shifted indoors. The stables grew quieter. Josiah's attention sharpened further. Time was narrowing. Denial could not hold indefinitely. Either the pattern would be broken or it would be named. Cornelius began speaking of selling horses. He spoke of reducing operations. He spoke of change as if it were something external, something imposed. He did not speak of responsibility. Institutional denial does not collapse suddenly. It erodes slowly, clinging to form long after substance has failed. At Ashwood Vale the structure still stood, orders were still given, reports were still filed, explanations were still accepted. But beneath it all, the truth waited, patient and unmoved, for the moment when it could no longer be ignored. The first cold nights of December brought a stillness to Ashwood Vale that differed from ordinary winter quiet. It was not merely the absence of insects or the thinning of work in the fields. It was a watchfulness that had no clear object. People moved as if expecting interruption, though none was announced. Cornelius Whitfield had begun to speak of departure. He claimed business in Charlottesville, matters of account and auction. He said the change of scene would be beneficial. He ordered preparations made without enthusiasm, as though the decision had been forced upon him rather than chosen. Josiah received the instruction without comment. He prepared the horses requested. He adjusted tack. He packed what was necessary. His demeanor remained unchanged. The ride-out took place early in the morning, the ground hard with frost. The road wound through woods and open stretches of field, largely deserted at that hour. Cornelius rode ahead at first, then slowed, allowing Josiah to follow at a measured distance. They spoke little. Cunillus filled the silence intermittently with talk of markets and bloodlines, but his voice lacked conviction. He glanced back often. Josiah responded when addressed and otherwise rode in silence. Several miles from the plantation, in a stretch of road bordered by dense trees, Cunillus's horse grew restless. The animal shifted, ears flattening briefly before settling again. Cunillus cursed and adjusted his reins. The incident that followed would later be described as a fall. Cunillus was found off the road, his body damaged in a way consistent with being thrown. His horse was discovered some distance away, injured but alive. Josiah returned alone to Ashwood Vale, visibly shaken, calling for help, reporting that the master had fallen and struck his head. A search party was organized. Cunillus's body was recovered late that day. The explanation was accepted quickly. The weather had been cold. Roads were treacherous. Horses were unpredictable. The sheriff recorded the death as accidental. With Cunillus gone, Ashwood Vale entered a period of confusion. Authority fractured. Instructions came from multiple sources and contradicted one another. Decisions were delayed. Accounts were questioned. The plantation's future became uncertain. During this confusion, another truth surfaced quietly, without proclamation. Men began to speak of the sequence of deaths not as isolated events but as a series. They spoke cautiously in private and without accusation. The observation itself carried risk. To connect the deaths was to suggest intention. To suggest intention was to suggest agency where none was supposed to exist. Still, records existed, dates, names, locations. A careful clerk tasked with organizing estate papers noted the proximity of events. He noted the consistency of explanation. He did not draw conclusions. He did not need to. The sheriff revisited his earlier reports. He did not amend them, but his language shifted. Where once he had written certainty, he now wrote likelihood. Where once he had dismissed suspicion, he now noted absence of evidence rather than absence of cause. Josiah was questioned briefly, formally, as part of routine. He answered calmly. He offered no speculation. He provided facts related to horses and handling. His responses aligned with recorded events. Nothing contradicted him. Beyond Ashwood Vale, word traveled, not through official channels but through rumor and repetition. Enslaved people on neighboring plantations spoke of a horseman whose masters had died one by one. The details varied. The tone did not. The story carried weight because it did not ask to be believed. It was told as something that had happened, not something meant to inspire. Among white planters, the story took a different shape. It was framed as misfortune, as curse, as warning. Some increased security. Some sold stock. Some altered routines. Few examined the underlying assumptions that made such fear possible. The truth did not surface as confession or exposure. It surfaced as recognition. No document named Jassa as responsible for more than one death. No witness accused him openly. No court considered the matter beyond what had already been recorded. Yet in the quiet spaces where certainty frayed, people understood that what had occurred could not be explained entirely by chance. The plantation had been undone from within its own operations, by means it had trusted and relied upon. That understanding did not lead to justice as it was defined by law. It led instead to unease, to caution, to a subtle shift in behavior that acknowledged vulnerability without admitting cause. Jasud disappeared shortly thereafter. He left Ushut's Vale under cover of confusion, taking advantage of delayed oversight and fractured authority. His absence was noted days later, then recorded as escape. A reward was posted. Descriptions circulated. Patrols searched briefly, then less so as time passed and leads failed to materialize. The truth, such as it was, had already done its work. It did not require capture or punishment to persist. It existed in the altered routines, in the guarded looks, in the knowledge that the system was not as closed, nor as secure as it claimed. Truth surfaced not as revelation, but as residue. It remained. The end of Ushut's Vale did not come with fire or public reckoning. It came slowly, through neglect, confusion, and quiet abandonment. Without Kunala's Whatfold, the plantation entered a period of prolonged uncertainty. Legal matters stalled. Creditors pressed. Overseers came and went. None remained long enough to impose lasting order. Mistress Whatfold withdrew almost entirely from view. She remained in the upper rooms of the house, attended by servants who spoke of her only in whispers. Decisions were deferred. Letters went unanswered. The fields were worked inconsistently. Horses were sold at reduced prices to cover debts. What had once been a place of steady profit became a burden no one wished to manage directly. The enslaved people of Ushut's Vale felt the change immediately. Discipline became uneven. Some days passed with little oversight. Other days brought sudden harshness as new overseers attempted to assert authority they did not yet understand. Work assignments shifted unpredictably. Families were separated without warning as portions of the estate were liquidated. Jassa's name was spoken rarely and never aloud in mixed company. Among the enslaved, it was mentioned cautiously, often indirectly. People referred to what had happened without naming him. The story carried forward not as celebration but as acknowledgement. Something had been done. Something had changed. No one claimed that life improved. Hardship remained. Violence remained. The system endured, but the idea that it was unassailable no longer held with the same force. In the months that followed, patrols across the county increased briefly, then returned to prior levels. Rewards were posted and forgotten. Slave catchers pursued rumors northward and returned empty-handed. Without a body or confession, the matter receded into uncertainty. The sheriff closed his file. The county court moved on to other concerns. The official record settled into language that favored closure over clarity. Ushut's Vale was sold within 3 years. The land changed hands more than once. Each new owner attempted to restore productivity and each failed. The stables fell into disrepair. The paddocks grew over. The quarters emptied gradually as enslaved people were sold to other properties. The small cemetery at the edge of the land remained. It was not marked formally. Names were remembered by those who had known them and then by those who had been told. Grace's grave lay beneath a willow tree. No stone bore her name. Still, people knew where she rested. Time passed. Elsewhere, Jasa lived under a different name. He worked when work was available. He avoided attention. He learned to read slowly with help from those who asked no questions. He spoke little of the past. When he did, it was without embellishment. He did not describe what he had done as justice or revenge. He described events. He described loss. He described what remained when all sanctioned paths had been closed. The cost did not leave him. He carried it quietly. Sleep came unevenly. Loud sounds startled him. He avoided confined spaces when he could. He did not expect absolution. He did not seek it. What he sought was distance from the place where dignity had been denied as a matter of law. The wider world did not mark his passage. No monument recorded his actions. No court weighed their meaning. His life continued without recognition beyond those who shared fragments of his story in trusted spaces. In the years that followed, the institution that had shaped Ushut's Vale fractured under pressures far larger than one plantation. Laws changed. Armies moved. Slavery ended formally, though its consequences did not. When historians later examined records from that period, they noted the cluster of deaths connected to one Virginia plantation. They noted the escape of an enslaved horseman whose whereabouts were never confirmed. They noted the decline of the property afterward. They did not find a confession. They did not find proof sufficient for courtroom certainty. What they found instead were patterns that resisted dismissal. The aftermath of Ushut's Vale was not a lesson neatly resolved. It offered no moral clarity that could be easily summarized. It presented instead a series of consequences unfolding over time, shaped by a system that had offered no lawful remedy for profound harm. Those who survived carried memory forward in fragments, in stories told carefully, in warnings given quietly, in the understanding that silence had limits. The plantation itself eventually vanished beneath new ownership and new uses. The land was divided. The structures were removed. Roads were built. Daily life moved on above ground that still held the past. What remained was not triumph or redemption. It was acknowledgement. A woman had died without protection. A child had never been born. Authority had closed ranks. And one man, denied every formal avenue of justice, had acted within the narrow space left to him. The aftermath did not restore what was lost. It did not erase harm. It did not settle the question of right and wrong in a way that satisfied all who later considered it. It left instead a record of what occurs when injustice is total and unrelieved, when law serves only power, and when memory is the only archive available to those denied the right to testify. That record does not ask for admiration. It asks only to be remembered. And in that remembrance, the silence surrounding Ashwood Vale no longer fully holds.